From the city of broad shoulders, this is Chicago Unscripted with CBS News Chicago's Joe Donlan.
In the first few weeks of his second administration, President Donald Trump has signed a flurry of executive orders, many of them carrying out changes he touted during his campaign. One of his targets has been the Department of Education.
Oh, I'd like it to be closed immediately. Look, the Department of Education's a big con job.
Doing away with the Education Department would literally take an act of Congress, and political experts agree that's unlikely. But dismantling it, well, that's another issue. The president's new Secretary of Education is Linda McMahon.
It is not the president's goal to defund the programs. It is only to have it operate more efficiently.
What exactly does the Department of Education provide? Chicagoan Arne Duncan ran Chicago Public Schools for nearly 8 years before he was tapped as the education secretary under his good friend, President Barack Obama.
What the Department of Education does is adds additional resources to make sure children with special needs have access to public education. Children who need access to food have that. Children who need access to pre-K has that. So to somehow act like the U.S. Department of Education is in charge of education in America is beyond dishonest.
It took a few weeks, but I finally caught up with Arne. He grew up in Hyde Park, graduated Magna Cum Laude from Harvard before playing professional basketball for 4 years in Australia. He has a number of concerns about the idea of gutting the education department. What would happen without that federal money? And what lies ahead? That's why I wanted to get him on the show. Plus, why didn't he run for Chicago mayor in 2023? At one point, he was considered a possible frontrunner. We also talk about a program he started 9 years ago after his time in Washington called Chicago Cred. It's a street-level program aimed at reducing gun violence in the city. He calls it the hardest work he's ever done. I would urge you to stick around for the end of our conversation. We talk about the shooting death of Benji Wilson in 1984. He was just 17, the top high school basketball prospect in the country, and a good friend of Arne's. Fast forward to today. The man who shot Benji did his time in prison, and when he got out, Arne hired him at Chicago Cred. He's in demand these days for his education expertise, and he was busy the day we spoke, but he was kind enough to give me 30 minutes. Here's Arne Duncan. Been a while, Arne. How are you?
Good to see you. A lot going on in the world. Good to reconnect.
You know, I tried to catch up with you on Twitter after the election, and your last tweet just said, I'm no longer going to use this platform. What happened?
I'm not a big fan of Elon Musk, as you can probably imagine, so I shifted to Blue Sky, and just a little too much toxic energy out there on Twitter. So it's some people are mad at me, so you got to stay on, but I just didn't want to. I was done, so I'm done.
Yeah, no, I get it. But I guess you could certainly make the case that that's probably where you should be at this moment in time, right?
You can make that case, and I'm always trying to reach people who may not agree, and have honest sort of authentic conversations and agree to disagree. And it just felt like there wasn't a whole lot of that happening there.
Do you think this is part of a bigger problem, Arne, in that politics has become more sport than policy? How to earn points against your opponents?
Yeah, well, this is really, and I'll say this lightly, this is an unprecedented time in our nation's history. And I don't know what the other side of this looks like if we're able to get to another side. So this is not, traditional politics. This is not left versus right or R versus D or whatever it might be. This is a president-elect who absolutely wants to be an authoritarian leader and is going to challenge democracy in every way he can. And so this is a very, very scary time in our nation's history. I think people are starting to wake up and understand what's at stake here.
Yeah, yet you hear it all the time, Arne. 75 million people voted for him. What do you think would be different this time than the first time?
Yeah, he absolutely won the election. It was a very slim margin of victory, as you know. That there was no mandate, and I think you're already starting to see the overreach. So we can talk about lots of theories as to why he won. Obviously having on the Democratic side of, the presidential nominee, drop out 100 days before the election is far from ideal. I haven't seen. I would be curious on the polls how much racism, sexism is just baked into our country. So when the vice president ran, how much of the deck was stacked against her. But there are also lots of things. I always try and look in the mirror and be self-reflective. I think there are lots of things that Democrats have done poorly or not done for a while now that contributed to the rise of an authoritarian leader. So this is a time of real, self-reflection and folks that really care about our country and care about our democracy. How do we try and preserve something that is teetering in a way, it's in a precarious position in a way that is frankly never been.
Well, I think the number was 1976, the last time there was an election that didn't have a Bush, a Biden, or a Clinton on the ballot, which is maybe one explanation for how we end up getting an outsider who had never been in politics like Donald Trump.
Oh yeah, that's accurate. People hate DC, and there was lots of folks who were polled who voted first for Obama and then for Trump in the last go round, and you're like, how can that happen? As you said so clearly, people said, "Oh, that's easy." Barack was an outsider and Trump was an outsider. So there's a through line there, but it goes. It's there's no one simple explanation here. It's a very complex situation. There are lots of possible explanations as to why we are where we are today.
Mm-hmm. Well, another one that is in more of your sweet spot that has to do with education, and Rahm Emanuel suddenly has become an interesting figure on the scene. He's back, and he said on the Bill Maher show the other night, Democrats are their own worst enemies. There should be no more talk of bathrooms in schools until we fix what's wrong with classrooms in schools.
Yeah, so the fight for educational opportunity is obviously the heart of my life's work.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see the most recent NAEP scores, which you probably saw, that were pretty devastating for the country, we have so far to go, and all of us own that. That's Democrats and Republicans, but it's not a time to be complacent. It's not a time to say things are okay. The dismantling of the Department of Education, which, as you know, I ran, does not help anything. In fact, there's a huge distraction. We can talk about that if you want. But yeah, the educational challenges are beyond real. And for me, it's not about test scores. It's if you don't have a high school diploma today, you're basically condemned to poverty and social failure. There are no good jobs out there. And if you don't have a chance to enter the mainstream and work or support a family, your chances of wanting to participate in a democracy are much lower. And so you are much more prone to be attracted to an authoritarian leader and feel the deck is stacked against you, because it is. And so for me, this is much bigger than education. It's about our nation's economy, and it's about our nation's democracy. And when education doesn't work, all those things start to break apart.
Well, the reason I wanted to have you on, Arne, was to talk about what's happening with the Department of Education, and we'll get there in a second. But let's hit some local politics in the news while we have you here. It sounds like Rahm is going to run for something. Do you think he wants to be mayor again?
I haven't had any conversations with Rahm since he's been back, so I have no insight there.
Would you be surprised if he did?
I honestly haven't really thought about it too much. So, I mean, there are bigger issues in the world for me right now than that one. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because at one point you were interested in the position yourself, and I've wanted to ask you about this. Why you in the end didn't run for mayor in 23, Arne?
Yeah, that was a very, very hard, internal conversation with my family. And as you know, I've never run for anything in my life. I love policy. I love kids. The work I'm doing now, we're starting our 9th year, which is sort of crazy, with Chicago Cred, which is laser focused on reducing gun violence on the south and west sides of Chicago. I say all the time that it's the hardest work I've ever done. It's honestly the most heartbreaking. We just had a devastating loss of one of our participants this weekend, unfortunately, so I'm a little bit raw right now, if I'm being totally honest. But I also think it's the most hopefully meaningful work I've ever done, and the work that hopefully will lead our city to a much better place. And the calculation I ultimately made was that there were lots of folks who wanted to be mayor. There was nobody who wanted to do what I do every day. and for me to be able to stay focused on what I think is the toughest issue facing the city, which is gun violence, and try and have the kind of systemic impact that we're getting to. We're not there yet, but really trying to bring down the numbers for the city. I felt that was the best use of my time and energy, and thought other folks could run, could and would run for mayor.
I want to talk to you about Chicago cred as well, but let's get back to the Department of Education. And I think in order to tap into how your expertise got where it is today, we need to at least set the stage for how you got there. And it started growing up in Hyde Park, which to me seems like it built the foundation for your career and ultimately your life and the work you're doing now with organizations like Chicago Cred.
It did. And I lived 2 blocks from where I grew up. My dad was a professor at the University of Chicago, so we literally lived on campus. And my mother ran an after-school program, but she started before I was born. On 46 in Greenwood, which is across the invisible barrier between middle-class integrated Hyde Park and all black, all poor North Carolina, Oakland. And going to her program every day was just absolutely formative, shaped me, shaped my sister, shaped my brother. I've all tried to follow in her footsteps. She did that work for 52 years until her health gave out, unfortunately. But just seeing the talent, the commitment, the hard work of my friends in the afternoon, and seeing the lack of educational opportunity they had during the school day compared to my friends in Hyde Park, that inequality, that grave injustice has been the driving force of my life. And I say all the time, talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And I always try to do the best I can to create opportunity where that talent is.
I talk a lot about serendipity, Arne, opening doors that at certain parts in our lives we couldn't even imagine. And I guess for you, that door that opened was basketball. And you met Craig Robinson, which led you to Craig's little sister, I guess, as you guys refer to her growing up, and ultimately Barack Obama. What do you remember about the time you met him the first time?
Yeah, you know your history well, but yeah, Craig was. I'll take it one more step just so you get sort of the Chicago story. So John Rogers has been my best friend and mentor since I was 10 years old. I'm 60 now, so it's a 50-year relationship. It's crazy. John, played her up my high school. And he was the start of the high school team when I was a little guy, and he went on to be a captain at Princeton. So he recruited Craig Robinson at Princeton. And Craig and Michelle came from a great family, but neither one of their parents had gone to college. So to go first generation, go into an Ivy League school was remarkable. And Craig was a great player. And so we grew up playing in all the summer leagues together. And so initially we knew Barack, you said exactly right, was Craig's little sister's boyfriend. That was who he was. And so we always say you can't hide character on the court, you can't hide who you are. So just playing a little bit, making sure he was good enough for Craig's sister. We did that, and decided he passed the test. Not that we had a vote, but we were doing our due diligence. And then obviously, going into the Illinois legislature and then the Illinois Senate, we spent a lot of time, visiting schools and talking education and building that relationship. And, when your friend and someone you respect so highly runs for president, that's a, once in obviously in a lifetime type of situation. Candidly, I had been leading the Chicago public school for 7.5 years. I wanted to do 10. I wasn't looking to leave. And very honestly, if anyone else would have asked me, I probably would have said no. I had no aspirations to be the Secretary of Education. I'm just a Chicago boy. But I knew his heart. I knew how much he cared. I just wanted to be a good teammate. And frankly, he'd said, already come to the White House and check out the garbage. I would have said, yes, sir. He just wanted to help his historic administration, not because he was a friend, but because I knew how much he cared about, young people in our country as a whole.
All right, so you take over as education secretary in 2009, and it's pretty safe to say in my research that that you pissed off people on both sides. I mean, the teachers' unions called for your resignation, and Republicans said that literally they wanted to make sure there were no more Arne Duncans. If you could go back, is there something you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting situation. And I woke up every day thinking that my job was to fight for kids and to create opportunity. And whether it's kids in any city of Chicago, whether it's kids in rural communities, whether it's kids on Native American reservations, there are tens of millions of kids we're not serving well for a whole host of reasons. And so it's interesting, I think the critique of me, and the same critique was true in Chicago, and there's truth to it that I moved too fast and upset some apple carts. I would say, Joe, my very, very honest reflection, if I could do it again, I would probably move even faster because you have such a brief window of opportunity to try and have impact. And we have so many kids so far behind. And, I made more than my share of mistakes, and happy to talk about those. But I can say very honestly to you and to all your listeners, your viewers, that there was never a time where we put adult interests ahead of children, and we tried to fight to create opportunities for the most vulnerable. And I'm happy, I'm amazingly proud of what we were able to accomplish, but there's so much more I would like to have done in a limited window of time.
Well, speaking of moving fast, Donald Trump is moving at lightning speed in the first month and a half of his new administration. Let's jump into what's happening now with the Department of Education, Arne, because that's why I really wanted to talk to you. What troubles you or scares you the most about the talk, at least, of doing away with the Department of Education?
Well, now I will answer that directly, but I want to say very clearly to your listeners that my biggest concern is what he is doing, not domestically. He's doing tremendous damage domestically, but what he's doing internationally, and the reordering of the world order, the aligning the United States with Russia, with Iran, with North Korea. It's devastating, doesn't begin to describe it. And the forsaking our allies, forsaking those who have been invaded, like the Ukraine. This is unimaginable what's happening. It's happening in real time. And Trump is lots of things. He's not subtle. This was very, very clear this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And he's been a Russian asset for a long time. He owes Russia, and he's going to do Putin's bidding. And the fact, we talk about threats, foreign and domestic. This is the biggest threat we've faced since World War II, and it is a domestic threat. And I'm not sure whether we are going to weather it or not. On the education, on the domestic side, the dismantling of the Department of Education is obviously incredibly intentional. Trump lies all the time, but once in a while, he'll say the truth. I'll never forget when he said, "I love the uneducated." And you have to think about it, Joe. When you're uneducated, you're more likely to bend towards an authoritarian leader, to lean that way, have less critical thinking skills. And so it is in his personal and political interest to hurt public education. And that is exactly what he is trying to do unapologetically.
Well, this is something that goes already to the bigger picture, and that is the silo effect that's happened to people. I think I said this the other day, that I met former FCC Chairman Newt Minow, and he told me that reporters should be skeptical, not cynical. And I worry that people are not even willing to be skeptical. No one's willing to critically think about issues or ask questions or even be skeptical. And as a result, you get what we're seeing here now. And I guess some are saying that, people are surprised at what they're seeing now. They voted for Trump because they were worried about the price of eggs. We're getting away from education here, but it's a bigger point. If you are surprised by anything that's happening right now, you weren't paying attention, because most of this, if not all of it, was said out loud leading up to the election.
You're exactly right. And, not everyone pays attention like you do, and most of your listeners do. And people were, angry at the time, and, angry at the, inflation, angry at the price of eggs. Joe Biden was an amazing human being who was so good to me and my family. I'll owe him forever. But, his polls were extraordinarily low. People weren't satisfied. And so they were looking for an alternative. And, was that the best, most well thought out alternative? I don't know. But, here we are. And for me, I'm not one to sort of, blame voters. I'm always trying to be, sort of more reflective and self-critical, and what could Democrats have done differently? And there's a lot Democrats could have done differently.
Well, let's go back to the education situation. What would be to you the most damaging thing if they were to dismantle this? What is the budget? $200 billion, I think, which is less than 2% of the federal budget. But what is the one or two most important thing or things that you worry about losing here?
Yeah, and just for folks who don't follow the intricacies of the Department of Education, just very quickly, what it really does is just provide additional resources to the most vulnerable. So whether it's children, going to pre-K and trying to get that education as 3 and 4 year olds, so they enter kindergarten ready to learn, whether it's additional resources for children who live below the poverty line, Title I money, whether it's money for English language learners, whether it's money for children with special needs, IDA who need, an aid in class, who need, more time, whatever it might be. Billions of dollars of Pell Grants for folks who are going to college and weren't born on third base. And so anything they might do to take away opportunity, take away resources from the vulnerable, and reduce their educational opportunity would be, morally and educationally bankrupt. I don't have an easier way to put it. And so that's what's at risk here. That's what's at play.
If you use their slogan, even "Make America Great Again," if you go to the isolationism that that the Trump supporters favor, and focus on America, you could certainly make the case, Arne, that this money at the Department of Education, arguably more than almost anything in the budget, does exactly that.
Yeah, this was not complicated. It's just that the dishonesty in everything they do, and it's like what they're saying about education is "quote unquote" give it back to the states. But as you know, 90% of the funding now comes at the state and local level. It's only about 8 to 10% at the federal level. So it's maybe a little counterintuitive, but our results our NAEP scores are far too low. We have a long way to go. But if you're going to cast blame, I'm not one who likes to blame. If you're going to cast blame on who has failed our children, if 90% of the funding comes to the state and local level, you can make a pretty good case the state and local communities have failed their own children. And you could make quite the opposite case that you need a greater federal investment. And I say all the time that a great military is our best defense, but a great educational system is our best offense as a country. This is in our nation's interest. It's a national interest. And the fact that that's not, understood or it's willfully ignored is beyond disturbing.
Some might answer that, though, Arne, that if the states are already providing 90% of the funding, why not 100%?
I wish they would, Joe. But again, let's just talk about what's the history. What's the history of the federal role? States did not voluntarily integrate schools. That took a federal role. That took federal troops to integrate schools. States did not provide access to education, to public schools, to children with special needs. I remember talking to Senator Harkin a lot from Iowa, whose brother was deaf and his brother was denied the chance to go to school. And that's why you had IDA. And again, just looking at this has always been a bipartisan issue, and education should be also been bipartisan or nonpartisan issue. You had Eisenhower created I'm giving Republican presidents. Eisenhower created the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Ford did IDA. Nixon had lots of challenges, as we know, as a president. Know what Nixon did? He signed Pell Grants into law, absolutely transformative. Both Bushes did things in education. So this, again, is not left versus right. This is the absolute anomaly. We've never seen another individual like Trump in the Oval Office.
What would happen with federal student aid with the FAFSA program? I mean, everyone who has a kid who's gone through college has had to fill that out. We took advantage of a FAFSA loan to get our first kid into college. What happens with that money?
That's a great question, and that's to be determined. And what they could do is they could, quote unquote, dismantle education, and let's just say they could move that to Treasury. They could move something else to HHS. They could move something to the Department of Labor. And what that does, it creates a lot of noise and drama. But what it doesn't do, Joe, it doesn't help a single child, not one child in America, better learn to read. And now coming out of COVID with so much learning loss, the entire focus should be how do we help a generation of kids catch up? There's nothing that the Trump administration has talked about that helps a single child learn to read.
I don't think anyone would argue that there's waste in government and that there's bloat. And I'm all for a detailed forensic dissection of the budget. I think it's well overdue and great that we're doing it. I think where people have a problem is the way it's being done. And these cuts are happening without debate, without discussion, without Congress. And you mentioned the Department of Education. It would take a supermajority in the Senate to do away with the Department of Education. You don't think that's going to happen. But I guess my point is why Republicans have control of everything. Why not, use Congress and take a collaborative look at what should be done and do it that way instead of just, by executive order from the White House?
That's a great question. And I think, unfortunately, you're almost too rational. Trump has no interest in Congress, whether it be Republican controlled or Democratic. Trump's whole goal in life is to be an authoritarian leader. is model is Putin. Putin doesn't have to bother with a Congress. Putin doesn't have to bother with a free press. That's what Trump is aiming to do.
Let's use the last few minutes we have with you, Arne, to talk about Chicago Cred, because I've always admired your work with that organization. From the day I got to Chicago, you were one of the first guys I met and talked with. And the work is so important and so impressive. Let me just, I guess, ask you a question about how we solve the issue of gun violence. And that's probably, I'm sure, a pipe dream. But do you think this comes from the bottom up with organizations like Chicago Cred, or from the government down?
I think it's a both and these are common. It's just like education. Gun violence is very complex, but what we've tried to do, and we started with 25 guys in one room 9 years ago. We're now serving over 1,000 men, women, and teens at 8 sites across the city who are at acute risk of shooting, being shot. And I said earlier, it's the hardest thing I've ever done, but the joy of my job is seeing that transformation over time, not overnight, of men who may have been shooters, may have been shot, may have been hunted, may have hunted others, and to see their transformation into folks who are positive, contributors to the community. Many of our staff now are alumni who we've hired. So giving people an off-ramp to these cycles of violence is desperately important. And just, coming out of COVID in our neighborhoods the past 3 years, we've seen 38 to 40% reductions in violence. So we're very, very encouraged about where we're going. We're now trying to scale this work with our partners to other communities. And I don't want to jinx us, Joe, but this year, if we can have a 4th consecutive year of reductions, it'll be the first time in 20 years that Chicago has done that. And so for me, there's a lot at stake. Long way to go. We're going the right way, and we're always trying to get better, faster, accelerate the pace of change.
It's a complicated issue, Arne, but if you could say the one thing people don't understand about how and why this happens, what would that be?
Ooh, man, that's a great question. I will say
poverty, the closing of schools, food deserts, there's all kind, lack of opportunity, lack of development.
All of those things. I always say, violence is the last sort of manifestation of all of our social ills. So whether it's, again, your point, lack of education, lack of resources, redlining, lack of jobs, disinvestment. I think the biggest thing I would like your listeners to understand is our common humanity. And I'll just grab so many examples, but one of our best teammates runs one of our sites in the West Side, actually killed a friend of mine, going back, going back 30 years. And I didn't know him, hated him most of my life, no idea who he was. He got out of prison, understood how much he had changed, understood the mistake he made when he was a 16-year-old kid. And I would take a bullet for that individual today. And so just understanding our common humanity, learning not to judge that, what people did, going back is not maybe who they are today. That's what I'd like your listeners to understand.
Are you talking about the Benji Wilson story?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I would love in the last minute or so we have, Arne, to just sort of highlight that, because that's another story that's just amazing. You ended up doing a documentary on it, right?
Yeah. So this is what we have talked about this publicly. Yeah. So the individual who tragically killed Benji and I, played growing up. I was 2 years older than him. I remember getting that call in my dorm room when I was a sophomore in college that he had passed, and that was I can't even describe the devastation. We always thought as athletes we sort of got to pass the neighborhoods and we wouldn't be massive, but tragically that was Billy Moore who killed him. Billy served about 20 years, got out, and very interestingly, we actually met on a peace march with Father Flagler, and we had a mutual friend introduce us. I said, "Tell me your story." We just walked and talked for about 2 hours and got to know his heart and his humanity. And he's a, absolutely dynamic and critical member of our team. Very tragically, his own son was killed
due
to gun violence. And what he said, which, this blows me away, he said that the young man who killed his son came into our program, he would mentor him, that you can't ask for forgiveness if you can't give it. And I don't know if I would be able to do that if someone harmed my son or daughter. So it's this work humbles you and teaches you incredibly powerful lessons every single day.
Well, Benji was the #1 basketball prospect in the country at the time he was shot over just a beef on the street, right? He bumped into Billy. And it is interesting because after Billy did his time, he got out and you put Billy in the room with Benji's family. And I have the chills right now because it was some of the most riveting television I've ever seen.
Yeah, that was one of the most powerful nights of my life. And to be clear, I didn't put him in the room. Billy wanted to meet with the family, and the family decided to meet with him. And it was a very tense. It could have gone any way, but I'll never forget at the end when the Benji's brothers said that, you took our older brother away, so now you'd have to be our older brother. And I'll never forget that. And
Well, you were in the room with them when this meeting happened, and I know he slid a bullet across the table, didn't he?
yeah, one of the brothers, one of the brothers he carried a bullet with him his whole life to kill Billy, to get revenge. And he pulled out of his pocket and said, "I no longer want to kill you. I hate freaking." The bullet was just sitting there, so I just grabbed it and put it behind me in a cup. But the emotions are I can't even describe the amount of emotions, both tough and extraordinary, during that evening conversation.
If you could, and I know you're living it every day, but if you could wave a wand, Arne, and do one thing that you think would dramatically improve the situation with gun violence, what would it be?
We say all the time that hurt people, but people who are healing can heal themselves and heal the community. And helping people heal from trauma is absolutely crucial to what we do. We have a team of about 22 clinicians, and the amount of violence, very few crimes get solved, as you know, in Chicago. So if you don't get justice in the criminal justice system, you have street justice and retaliation. We are constantly trying to stop the next shooting. And I have examples of times when we have had people shot at who, rather than retaliating, went and found the people and told them they had to come into our program. And that's the kind of change in mentality, change in mindset that's incredibly difficult, but that's what saved lives.
Final thought, Arne. I had an educator the other day tell me, we survived Betsy DeVos, we'll survive Linda McMahon.
Yeah, Linda McMahon is the least of my worries. And it really, I want to be clear, I'm much as worried as I am domestically, I'm much more worried internationally. So I'm spending very little of my time on Linda McMahon. I've said publicly, if she wants to do something to help kids, I would help her. I don't want her to fail. I would do whatever I could to help her if she wants to do that. But the damage Trump is going to do to our nation, to our nation's standing globally, is absolutely staggering. I don't know, sitting here today, Joe, whether our country comes out the back end the same as we came into this administration. This is a domestic threat unlike any we have seen in the history of our nation.
Well, you've seen a lot of domestic threats here in Chicago, so we'll take that for what it's worth. And I know you're doing the hard work again every day, Arne. And I appreciate all that you do for the city, and all that you do to try to make it a better place. And I know you've got a lot of requests for your time these days and a lot going on, and I appreciate you spending some with me.
Thanks so much. Thanks for a really tough interview. Take care now.
All right. See you, Arne. My thanks to Arne. I could have used another 30 minutes for sure. You've probably seen him on the cable news shows, but not on Fox, although he told me if they asked, he would absolutely go on. Brian Griggs of Brian Griggs Productions edits the audio for Chicago Unscripted. Ellie Coder edits our social media content. The original music comes from Chicago vibraphonist Thaddeus Tukes, and Bill Curtis lends his voice to the introduction each episode. I'm Joe Donlin. I'll see you on CBS News Chicago. It's available everywhere on the CBS News app. As always, I thank you for listening to Chicago Unscripted.